So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you so much, Rahul, for joining us today. Let me quickly introduce Rahul to you. Rahul is a Canon US maestro, also the founder of RS Photography. I personally have been following his work for the longest time. I'm a big fan of his. I really like how his images stand out, mainly because the thought that he puts into creating each image. Because clicking an image, a lot of people do. Creating an image is something that very few people do, and Rahul is definitely one of them. And I always wanted to interact with Rahul and understand what goes into creating an image and how his photographs have evolved with time. Because that happens with every photographer who's serious about his art, that he puts into a lot of thought into it, and he also evolves with time. So today would be a very interesting session because I hope to learn a lot from Rahul today about how his skill changed with time, how it evolved with time, how his pictures over the time have changed, and so has his thought process. So Rahul, please start the session. It is all yours. I also request everyone, in case you have any questions, please keep them for the end where will have a Q&A session. Uh, Please let Rahul finish his session and then we can get into our discussions. All yours, Rahul.
Thank you, Sushil, for the overwhelming intro, if I might say so. I don't know what I've evolved or whatever, but yeah, I mean, the plan right now for me is to take you guys through a journey that I think I went through in the last 15 years that I've been clicking, 15, 16 years, whatever. I don't know whether there's a conscious effort from my part in terms of thinking a lot before each image, but there are some things that I do which I hope to talk about in terms of during the presentation. So I know that you guys have this limit of around 40 to 60 minutes. That's what Sushil had told me. I am very bad with timings, so just cut me off if you think that I'm boring you guys too much. Okay, I'll try to keep it to an hour and not more than that, and we can then open it up to Q&A sessions. Okay. All right, so let me just try and share this screen of mine, which I should be able to do. Okay, do you guys see something? Do you see my screen?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, so I mean, to be honest with you guys, this is not the first time I'm talking about how wildlife photography has evolved for me. I've done a much bigger session earlier, but I'm going to try and concise that into this one. I've when Sushil, for example, told me that how about you taking up a topic like the evolution of wildlife photography for you. That for you is very important. I can't really talk about evolution of photography for everybody, but that for you told me that what I should probably talk about is my journey, and that's what in the last month or so I've consciously started thinking about what the journey really was and is, and the way I tried to do it, what made logical sense to me was I divided my journey into 4 songs. I know the old time cassette that you see generally has side A and side B, but I've divided into, let's say, side A with 2 songs and side B with 2 songs. Okay, and we'll cover the 4 songs today. Hopefully you will see a progression from song 1 to song 4. Now, although I hinted that song 1 is here and song 4 is slightly higher, that's not really the case. It's just where I am at a stage on what I like in photography today versus what I used to like earlier, kind of thing, right? So some of you might think that song 1 is the best one. Some of you might think the song 2 is the best one. Some might say song 3 is the best one. And some might be with me who are more happier with song 4 than the rest of the 3. So we'll see. Okay, let's go ahead. All right. Okay, so let's see quickly what are the contents of my cassette. The first song, as I say, is Super Sharp, Super Happy. Now, this was a stage where, let me take you guys slightly, before the photography started, kind of thing. I first went to a park called Ranthambore in 2003, if I remember correctly. And I didn't see a tiger. I did 6 safaris. I didn't see a tiger. And during those days, it was normal. I mean, I happened to take a good 27 safaris in Ranthambore before I saw my first tiger. So I was particularly lucky about that. But anyways, in the first 6 safaris that I did not see a tiger, I saw a lot of birds. And when I came back to my house in Pune, and I started, I used to do, walks around the Pune University, beautiful campus and all. And I suddenly started seeing birds. And so that's what triggered my interest in trying to capture these birds. And the first song for me was, just to be able to get sharp images about the birds. And whenever I used to get a sharp image, I used to be like super happy, yeah, must photo mila kind of thing, right? So you've got this thrush in Sattal, striated thrush in Sattal. A good bird to get at eye level is what I used to think at that point in time. It did not used to come at many heights. Unlike nowadays, Sattal was not all about heights, only about heights. There were very few places where the forest people would feed some birds, kind of thing. Not as professional and as debatable as it is today, kind of thing. Okay. So this was a stage when I was very happy about myself. I'll talk more about this one later. The second one happened to be wherein I got fixated with species. I used to do mammals as well. Although I'm representing birds here in both the songs 1 and song 2, I used to do mammal species as well. So I'll go try for the desert cat, desert fox, Indian fox, all the normal, easier to get kind of species I'll try to do. But I was more intent on getting as many Indian birds as I could. And that stuck with me for a long, long time. For example, this broad-tailed grass bird was clicked in Pune. I think at Siagarh, that's where we first found it back in 2015-16. And so I was pretty kicked about this bird when I saw it for the first time, because I had read stories by Ramki and the other stalwarts who have been doing bird photography for a long, long time, that how tough it was to get this bird. So this was also a stage where I was happy that I knew that my path. I knew that I'm doing decently in terms of getting portraits. I'm doing decently in terms of exposure, composition, doing research in terms of finding correct places to where the probability of seeing a bird is more than otherwise, kind of thing. Then I went into a third stage wherein the species bit, the species, kya bolte hain? The drive for hunting for species in me reduced, and the drive for looking for stories increased. Now, the story could be with a bird, could be with a mammal, could be with anything. It could be a natural history moment. For example, this cheetah being intimidated by the giraffe here. Horrible light, I know, horrible angle also in some sense. But anyways, this was actually the stage which was most important, I think, in my journey, because this is where I started questioning myself. Am I doing the right things? Is this enough? And so on and so forth. Okay, and which then came the last song, which is currently the song that I am probably on. There could be a song 5, song 6. I hope there is. I really hope there are more songs to my journey than just these 4. So here now is a stage where I don't want to do the obvious. I want to surprise people. I want to surprise myself more than anybody else. I want to convey nature the way in a way that there is some mystery to it. I want people to stop and think when they see an image on what it is. Now, when I say stop and think, it could be because of 2 things. One is because of the technical brilliance. Well, I'm not technically brilliant. I have no shame in accepting that. I am not technically brilliant. I know my camera well enough to do some stuff. But what I want people to be questioning is, how did he think about it? How did he represent this? What has he used in the nature elements? What has he done? And if an image questions you, if an image begs you to ask a question, in today's world where you see, probably if you go on Instagram, you see like 200 images in 5 seconds. You're just scrolling. The most important at the end of the day for me as a photographer who wants to show images to the viewers is that I want to stop their thumb even for a couple of seconds. If they can stop that thumb and not keep scrolling up, I think I'm asking the right questions. And once you start asking questions to people in terms of images, you start making them think about the image, making them think about the subject, making them think about the environment. And I hope these things follow. Now is a stage where I'm probably at peace. I'm not very happy with what I'm doing, but I'm satisfied that at least I'm on a path which I'm liking. Okay, so let's go on with song 1. I'll show you a few images from each of the songs, and you guys can store questions if you have of any images that you want to ask later also, and we'll see. Okay, so instead of going from song 1 to song 2 to song 3 to song 4, I've clubbed them together. Song 1 and song 2 are by and large about species and good exposure and sharp images and that sort. And song 3 and song 4 is more of the moments and creativity. Okay. All right. So the reason these guys are here, I know none of them are great images. Okay. But the reason they are here is because this is where I started off. That top left image of the Rudy Turnstone is an image that I clicked back in 2006, I think, on Akshi Beach with a 100-400 Canon 30D, if I remember correctly. Okay. So that is the first bird that really told me, or that was the first time that I was successful in clicking a wader. Because I had no idea till then. I was like, I'll go to the bird and I'll just try and walk up to it, or be stupid, be impatient kind of thing. So when I was researching about birds, I came up with this profile of a guy called, I don't know how the pronunciation goes, but his name is Georgi Schimili. He's probably from the Netherlands, and he does a lot of work on shorebirds, both not only in terms of photography but in terms of conservation as well. So I read up his blogs, and he was coming up with a book for shorebirds, and that really intrigued me. That the way he had talked about approaching the bird, or letting the water come in so that the bird comes to you, kind of thing. Today that is pretty, I think everybody does that. So getting an image of the Rudy Turnstone is no big deal. But anyways, I was pretty happy with that image because that was the first time I was probably lying down on the ground flat, doing exposure correctly, doing going to the eye level correctly, and getting a pleasing image rather than a blotchy background kind of thing, which I generally used to get. Also, I think the reason why these 4 images are here is because these seem to be the easier subjects for me. Very easy to see. They don't have places to hide, and me being from Pune, water bodies are plenty around Pune, so I learned most of my bird photography in a place called Kaudi. I used to go there probably every morning for a couple of years, and literally every morning in winters, because I used to stay like 8 kilometers from Kaudi. So I used to get up at like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, go to Kaudi, come back home, take a shower, and go to office. That was the routine, and so that's where I did most of my bird photography in the initial days. The common teal that you see on the bottom right is from there. The Gargani male that you see on the left is from there. Now this is also an image that I really liked because I think this was the first image where I thought about what I wanted to click before I clicked. Okay. Now, if you've been to Kaudi Part, you know that there is a bridge that goes across the water, correct? That bridge is made out of brick or brickish kind of structure. So when you have the evening light coming on the bridge now, it reflects very well on the water and gives the water a pinkish feel. That is the pinkish feel that you see here in the water. It's the reflection of the bridge. So all that I had to do was, hopefully the hyacinth that Kaudi is marred with these days. Thankfully, it was not the case during those days. It was not that rampant. So we did have clean patches of water as well, without the muck and the hyacinth. So for a couple of evenings, I went there and lied down at one particular position where I knew that the water is looking very beautiful, and I waited for any duck to come by. The Gargani came, the common teal came, the shoveler came, but I somehow ended up liking this image the best, which is why it mostly makes my presentations when I talk about my initial days, right? Okay. This is a mix of species and portraits, obviously. The first one on the top left is the red-naped Shaheen. I used to call it the Barbary falcon, but I was corrected later on that it is the red-naped Shaheen. I somehow like the Barbary falcon as a name better, but maybe some other day. But the reason that guy is there, one, obviously, is for the species, and second is because that's another place where I've learned a lot. It's LRK. I've spent a lot of time in LRK over the past 10, 15 years. Done a lot of it. It's the first forest that I actually got to know very well, or forest or wildlife place. For example, I had friends who used to talk about Kanha, and they used to talk about roads, Salghat se jao and Indri se jao, or And I used to be like, bonkers, kaise, how do they remember these things? There are no markings or anything. And then I went to LRK, and I stayed a couple of nights in the run with the drivers there, because we went too far away, to come back to the camp kind of thing. And that place is massive, and somehow I got lucky in, I don't know why my brain switched on for that place, and I got the topography well. So it's a place very close to my heart, because that is one place where I know that I hopefully will not get lost, because I always know where I instinctively am in LRK. It's the first forest that I knew. It's the first forest that has been very kind to me. I call it forest, probably incorrectly, but yeah, pardon me for that for now. The second bird, as most of you would know, is the Pallas's fishing eagle. Now there are some birds in everybody's life, every bird photographer's life, that make your life difficult. For me, there are two of them that I've always wanted but never got easily. One is Pallas's eagle, because this guy, I used to always see him in Corbett. He's not very difficult to see. You go to Kaziranga, you go to Corbett, they're always there. But they never used to present themselves well to me in terms of the photography angle, the light kind of thing. So this was an exceptional case wherein the one time that this guy decided to be very, very patient with us. There were like a bunch of us out there, and he was least bothered. He or she, I don't know the gender, but yeah. So you were very mighty. I was very mighty kicked on that day. Pallas's eagle mil gaya yaar, must blue background hai, dual tone hai, green hai upar, and everything is hunky dory, right? The other two, the bunting and the siva, are from Pangut and Sattal. Again, not very great in terms of the images as I see today. Some of you might think that the siva image is better than the bunting image, purely probably because of the green background and the way the siva is. But let me tell you, the reason I kept this image here is because it used to be an image that I was very, very happy with. But today I know that, I should have done one very basic thing correctly in this image. Now, if you see birds in the forest, they generally, okay, it's not a rule that fits all, but they generally would pick up branches that are suited to their feet. So if you see at the bunting, the size of the branch of the tree that he's sitting on, it suits his legs. It suits it. The siva is like, my feet size is 9 and I'm wearing 11 size shoes kind of thing, right? I mean, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't be comfortable. The reason why the siva is sitting on that huge branch is because I placed it there, right? I mean, so this is at a place called, now made very infamous because it is now called a studio in Sattal. During those days when we clicked this much earlier, it wasn't called a studio kind of thing. It was or for those of you who do not know this place, it's a small stream kind of thing that is coming in, wherein you get a lot of species bathing early morning and late evening, or from around 4:35ish every day. And the siva is one of them. Up until we got to know of this place, the clicking the siva, or the minla as they call it, was not very, very common. So we used to go there and wait there for the birds. And when they came from the bush to the water, there used to be some perches placed by photographers or whoever, where they used to land and go ahead and take their bath. And this is a mistake that I'll never commit again, because I don't think I'll ever want the bird to look on an sitting on an artificial perch kind of thing. But anyways, those were the days when I was very happy with it. Okay, then I got a little more crazy about the species hunt. Give me a second, guys. I'm sorry, somebody's calling me. I'll just switch it off. Okay. Right. So the one on the top left is called the Mrs. Hume's pheasant, a bird that is seen in the northeast of India. The second one, if I remember correctly, is called the white-browed laughing thrush. The third one, the forest bird, is the greater neck-list laughing thrush. And the fourth one is the common golden eye. Okay, all pretty impressive species to get if you are a bird photographer. 3 of them have been clicked in Thailand, not in India, and 1 is clicked in Japan. Now, remember I said that, there was a state in my wildlife photography journey where I was crazy about species. And I would go to many places wherein, the probability of getting the species is higher. And Thailand is one of the places. Northern Thailand is one of the places where it's very easy to get some very, very hard to spot species in India. The Mrs. Hume's pheasant is one of them. The greater laughing thrush is one of them. The white-browed laughing thrush is probably the rarest of them all, and you'll see a few more in the slides to come as well. So all these images, if you talk about it from a photography perspective, it's more of the camera's work than me. As long as I do two things correctly, the camera is going to do everything right. The two things that I need to do correctly is I need to sit in the correct angle in terms of the light, and I need to sit in the correct angle in terms of the level. Okay. Obviously, I need to know the bird behavior a bit. I need to know where the bird could be found. Now, just like Koklas pheasant in Sattal and Pangut, wherein if you want to see the Koklas pheasant in Pangut, you typically end up going early in the morning before any other vehicle comes in. And when they move from the higher altitudes to the lower altitude, you see them crossing the road. Similarly, you get it for the Mrs. Hume's pheasant as well. In Thailand, they cross a particular road. Just as that, they are much more, there are many more than the Koklas pheasant in Pangut Sattal. So we spent around 2 or 3 mornings on this particular belt of forest in a place called Doi Lang. And on the third morning, I think we got lucky with the Mrs. Hume's pheasant. So yes, patience plays its part, but also the camera was very important to capture these early in the mornings with low lights kind of thing, right? The common goldeneye, as you can see, is more of a record shot, if anything else. The level is bad, the background is bad, but it's just a species that I really, really wanted to capture, always wanted to capture. So when I got it, I was like, no, I have to get it kind of thing. Another 3 species which I was very pleased with. I still am pleased with getting the first one of the 3, which is the white gorgeted flycatcher, because I don't see many images of this guy from India. Again, all 3 in Thailand, in various parks, but mainly focused around the Doi Lang area. The guy in the middle, the resplendent blue guy, is called the large Neel Tawa. We very commonly see the small Neel Tawa in our hills in Uttarakhand. We also see the large Neel Tawa in the northeast, correct? But yeah, so this was one of the few occasions wherein this guy was sitting on a rock with moss. So it's it's not a big perch that they've placed there. It's a rock with moss. But if you notice what I said earlier, when these birds choose the perches on their own, they are always like proportional to the leg size. Even the white gorgeted flycatcher or the spot-breasted parrotbill on the right. Now remember the spot-breasted parrotbill in the right, because I'm going to reference to this guy when we come to song 4. I have some images which might we might want to discuss this image with them. Okay. All right. I know the top left image is kind of out of place with the other 3. But I don't know how many bird photographers are there on this forum right now. Can any of you take a guess of which one is the top right blue bird? I don't know if anybody's on unmute, but you can unmute yourself and say the name if you know the name. When I started bird photography or started guiding people as bird photographers, one of the very important things that we used to need to know was how skilled are our clients. Okay, so I just evaluated right now, saying, let me see how many of you know this bird. If you don't know this bird, I can give any name, kind of thing. Unfortunately, nowadays people like Sushil record these things, so I can't really bluff. But anyways, so this is a white-tailed robin. The reason the only reason I made the trip to Thailand for the first time was to find this bird. I am yet to see any very good images from India. When I say good, very clean images from India for this bird. And Thailand, if you guys want to go, can go. And this bird is not very tough to get there. Coming back to the gentleman on the top left, the Stolixas bushchat, which is clicked in Tal Chapar. I call him again on record, I'm saying this, but anyways, sorry. So yeah, so this guy, I call him the Shashi Kapoor of the bird photography world, or the birding world. I'll give you a minute or half a minute to think why do I call him Shashi Kapoor. You guys can think in your minds, and then I'll give you the answer. Okay. Okay, the reason I call him Shashi Kapoor is whenever I saw Shashi Kapoor's movies in Bollywood, he would walk with a strut. He would walk with his chest wide open, and he's got this style. And whenever the Stolixas bushchat used to do this puff and roll kind of behavior that it is known for, it just directly reminded me of Shashi Kapoor. So I call him the Shashi Kapoor of the bird world. Anyway, this was a time wherein I wanted to capture this moment more than the species. I was like, this moment is more important. The puff and roll is something that I want to get. For any of you who've been into photography for a while, you would know that this is not the best of lights. It is pathetic light almost, right? I mean, this probably clicked at 10:30, 11 in the morning. But thankfully, there aren't many harsh shadows on him, which I got lucky with that, with the angle a little bit. But it was a moment that I wanted to capture nonetheless. The bottom two gentlemen are again two forest dwellers who are not very easy to get. One is the scarlet-faced Leocichla, and the gentleman on the left bottom is the snowy-browed flycatcher. The snowy-browed flycatcher is still easier to get in India these days because we know of a couple of places where they are more regular than otherwise and more accessible. Like Kotdwar in Uttarakhand is very accessible place where you get this guy in the winters. Again, by and far more or less a point and shoot image, nothing more than that, right? I was there with the correct angle, correct equipment, knew how to control the exposure, and got the image. That's about it. Not much thought, as I would say. Now, if you see the earlier images, okay, sorry. Now, I'm just going back and coming ahead. If you notice in these slides, the slides are getting darker and darker and darker in tonality, right? The reason is that because I think in my journey as a bird photographer, when I moved from, let's say, super sharp, super happy to species to going forward with the moments, somewhere I started, subconsciously thinking more about how to make an image slightly more unique, which is where I started thinking more about exposure and controlling the light and controlling what I'm showing to the viewer, kind of thing, right? Which is why you see in these images, these are all heavily underexposed images. In fact, the black-crested bulbul that you see on the top right, for most bird photographers, that is a heavily underexposed image for the bird. But I'm okay with that because, my purpose is not to get a passport or a visa for the bird. I am not the passport officer to give him a passport based on whether uska kaan dikh raha hai ya aankh dikh rahi ya nahi dikh rahi. I want to arrest your attention. And if that can be done by underexposing the bird dramatically, so be it, kind of thing, right? So these are again three birds which I clicked in the southern part of Thailand in a place called Kaeng Krachan, and that's a fantastic place for broadbills. As you can see, the silver-breasted is displaying well. It's also very good for one of the very rare scimitar babblers, which is on the bottom right, the large scimitar babbler or the great scimitar babbler. I forget the name exact, but you guys can correct me on that. Again, a spotlight kind of image wherein I was very happy to control the exposure. So this one, this slide to me was not purely species and not purely super sharp images. It was something of a transition stage for me, kind of thing. Which brings me to the, once I'm changing the style that I used to capture from species to moving to moments and then to exposure and then to the stage where I went mad. Okay. But as I said earlier, stage 3 was very critical in my journey, because that is when I thought that, I really started putting thought into my photography. Okay. Now these images might not be chronological. For example, the image on the bottom right of the river lapwing attacking the sambar was clicked back in 2008 in my first journey to Corbett. But back then it did not appeal to me much. When I reached my Song 3 journey, it started appealing to me more. Okay. If Amar Gatargi is there on this call, he would know the Shrike image because he was lying beside me when we were shooting this together along with another friend of ours called Abdullah. Anyway, the reason why that image makes this presentation, the Shrike Shrike eating the spiny tail lizard, is because there is a story that it tells me, not in terms of just that the Shrike has killed a spiny tail lizard. If you choose the right month, getting these images in Tal Sapar is not very difficult. Raptors on a kill or Shrike on a kill is not very difficult if you choose your right month to go to Tal Sapar. What this image conveyed to me was, do you see the grass blade coming out? This grass blade that's coming out behind the spiny tail lizard. This is where I thought there is story in this image. not as an obstruction to the image. But the story to me is that it's almost as if the soul of the lizard is leaving out. It's going away. The spiny tail lizard has been killed by the shrike, and the soul is leaving it, kind of thing. That's the message that I wanted to convey, anyways. So as I said, this is the stage where I started thinking a little bit, sometimes foolishly, sometimes things that worked, kind of thing. The image on the left top of the three cheetahs trying to get an impala down was also another interesting moment in the wild. So was this young cub, trying to disturb his mom when she was doing a very important job of getting meal to the other members of the family. If you notice, the mouth of the cub is slightly reddish. That's because they already had a meal in the morning, so there was really plenty food for them. So the cub wasn't really bothered about the food much. He just wanted to play. But anyways, important moment for me, because it was one of the first times where I got interaction between lions in the field. So it was a good change for me from a standard portrait kind of photographer to moving to the moments kind of thing. Another few moments in the wild that I was lucky to witness. The top left was a scene in Hokkaido where the juvenile Steller sea eagle was being mobbed by an adult Steller sea eagle. These sea eagles are pretty interesting. They use the ice pack which builds up in the Amur basin in Russia, Kamchatka. And in the winters, what happens is, once the ice forms in the Amur basin, it breaks off and it comes down towards Japan. And the eagles come down with the ice pack into Japan. So when we went to Japan somewhere in early Feb, we had a good 300, 400 Steller eagles around, and they are massive. I remember being in awe of a white-tailed eagle when I first saw it in Tal Chapar. And this guy actually dwarfs the white-tailed sea eagle. It's massive, really, really massive. Another few moments that you can see here. One is the cormorants going after a fish, which is a very typical scene of Bharatpur. Again, Bharatpur is a place where, I mean, the more I spend time on Bharatpur, I can do a complete session on Bharatpur someday probably. But one advice for anybody out here who wants to do bird photography in Bharatpur is, don't go mad about species. Just go about moments and creating images there. It doesn't matter whether it is a cormorant or a darter or a pelican. They all can provide phenomenal action there. The one on the bottom left is again the red-naped Shaheen on a pigeon kill. Of late, in the last 3-4 years, getting raptors on kills in LRK, people have been much more successful than earlier. People have got better at tracking them. But this was my first successful tracking of a kill. So we were sitting with this red-naped Shaheen for a couple of days, actually. We used to go there in the morning, be with him, go there in the evening, try to trace him and be with him. The difference between the red-naped Shaheen and the peregrine falcon, which is the more famous resident or more famous migrant of LRK, is that the red-naped Shaheen generally likes the salt workers. It is always found around the salt workers. So we used to keep in mind that, okay, in the evening, isko yahan dekha tha, tomorrow morning we have to come back and try and track him. So we did the same on this morning as well. We tracked him. He was sitting there nice and pretty, posing for a good, decent images. One of the images you saw much earlier as well of the same individual. Then this guy took flight, and for a good 7-8 minutes, we tracked him through the binoculars, and he made a kill mid-air, which we obviously were tracking through the binoculars. It was too far for the camera, and I'm sure I wouldn't be able to handle the camera for 7-8 minutes anyways. And so this was my first time that I was successful in waiting patiently for the bird to do something, get a kill, come down, eat it enough so that he is not bothered with my presence anymore, and then we moved in and kind of took a few shots here. This particular moment was also very special to me because luckily during the same time that I was there in LRK, Tim and Carol Inskip were also there. And they wanted to see the red-naped Shaheen as well. They were here. They were there with Nikhil Devasar, who was guiding them. And so when I saw this guy making the kill, I called up Nick and I told him, boss, you guys should come here because you'll get what they wanted to see. And so yeah, that is my contribution to the birding world, if I may say so. And I showed this image to those guys, this species to those guys. The bottom right image is of Choti Tara. For those of you know who Tadoba. It's a famous tigress from there. Nothing great, just that she made a kill, walked across the road, went into the bushes, and we got a decent moment to shoot. No great skills in terms of photography at all. No great skills in terms of even in terms of tracking and anything of that sort from my side there. All right, a few more moments from the wild. One from Amboseli with the elephant coming in with the rainbow. I did a lot of wide angles here as well. Some of them work, some of them don't work. But I always wanted to get an image of the entire subject being encompassed by the rainbow. I've seen a lot of rainbows in the wild, but I never used to get lucky with an animal under it. So here I got slightly lucky. The one on the right is again a pretty moment of a lioness taking care of her cubs, either taking care or reprimanding. I think reprimanding is also taking care in some sense. So they were on a kill with there were 3 lionesses and 8 cubs, and they were on a kill in the bush. And the only time that they came out was once the kill was finished and they decided to relax and play a little bit, and that's when we got some decent frames there. The bottom right is of a very, very famous coalition in Masai Mara of 5 cheetahs. They are called, I think, Tano Bora these days. I don't know what the word means, but they are mistakenly thought of being 5 brothers, but that's not the case. They are a from 2 different families. They are a group of 3 brothers and 2 brothers who come together and made a coalition of 5, and they probably rule the entire Mara these days. In fact, for the last 5 years now, 4 or 5 years that they've been ruling. Very standard silhouette, standard approach. They go against the light, make sure that there is enough distance between the ground and the body of the subject so that the legs are available. I think that's rule number 1, which some people, I don't know why they forget. The legs have to be visible for a silhouette. So tick mark there, the legs are seen. Subject is black, not too many obstructions, and I went with a nice 10,000 Kelvin or 9,000 Kelvin for the white balance to get the yellow. A no-brainer shot, really. Okay. Again, a few experiments with exposure. As I said, song 3 was the time when I kind of went from moments to exposure, and there in between I played around a little bit. The mother giraffe with the young one being mobbed, if I may say so, by the oxpeckers who are perennially there with the giraffes reflected an interesting moment for me, because it's very seldom that you see a big giraffe without an oxpecker, and getting them in the silhouette was something that I really liked. The one on the right is a zebra going into the sunset kind of thing. Did not want to go completely black on it because I think the stripes add a lot of value to this image. If I would have underexposed even more, I could have underexposed this even more and got the zebra completely black, and probably I could have gone white balance at 10,000 or even warmer and got the sky as orange, completely orange. But what I did differently here with the exposure was I did not change the white balance. I did not change the white balance from daylight, which is why you see a bluish cast to the sky, and it kind of worked for me on that day. It still does. I think this was clicked in 2014, 15 sometimes. It still works as an image to me. So it stays there. Okay, then was a stage where I got crazy with silhouettes. I did a lot of silhouettes. I still do. For people who come with me, you would know that I generally click more against light than with light. For those of you who do not know what against light and with light means, with light is how I'm sitting right now. The light is in front of me, and it's falling on my face, and the camera, which is the laptop, is sitting in the middle, right? So there's a light behind the laptop, there is a laptop, and there is me, the laptop being the camera. So I get nicely illuminated face kind of thing, right? Now, if I would have changed the scenario a little bit, and if I pick up the light on the light from behind the laptop and took it behind me, that is behind me, that is shooting against the light, wherein the camera is facing into the light and the subject is going to look dark, and that's how you get the silhouettes kind of thing. We'll talk more about these. Don't worry. Okay. As I said, that rainbow on that elephant day, we did some wide angles, some worked, some didn't. I liked the fact that there was a double rainbow here, so I wanted to capture that. And the only way to do justice to that was going slightly wider. The image on the right is something, again, a moment that it took me a long time to get lucky with this moment, because I've seen a lot of photographers get back with these images of lions shaking their mane and, the water all sprinkling all around. And, no matter how many trips I did to Africa, I never used to get lucky. So when this thing happened, I was like, yeah, mil gaya, finally I got something. That he is, besides a female lion, just adds to the moment a little bit. She's a little irritated probably because of all the water that this guy is splashing onto her. But it's a nice moment. It was a very dull afternoon, not too much contrast in the scene. And I thought black and white might work better, which is why I've converted it to black and white. And I think it works better than the color. I'll probably share the color as well someday on Insta, so you guys can decide for your own, decide for yourself, I would say. And then this happened. Most of you guys would have seen this image. So if siblings fighting in Ranthambore back into June 2015. So this image happened in 2015, but the reality of it really struck me in 2017. And the reality was that, or let me put it this way. So 2017, this image won an award for me in the Nature's Best competition, right? Truth be told, I do not know what I've done in this image. Imagine yourself being in a gypsy with 4 tigers. You've been clicking for 10 years, 12 years. So you know how to position your gypsy by now. Okay, that much at least you would know. And I'm sure most of us in this webinar today would know, right? So you have these two siblings who are showing aggression towards each other. You know that there's going to be a fight happening, somewhere in the forest. You don't know where it's going to happen. You are just plain goddamn lucky that it happened 15 feet in front of you in the open, right? So as a photographer, what did I do here? If I think, very objectively, I positioned the vehicle correct. Correct and luckily, I made sure that I had the right lens. I did not pick up the 500 mm. I picked up a slightly wider telephoto zoom kind of thing. I made sure that my shutter speed that I'm getting is high enough. Ab itna to I think all of us do anyways, right? In the field, when you know that there is a tiger sighting and there is a chance of something happening, you would do this homework at least, right? And that's what I did, and I won an award for it. And that made me really think that, did this image really deserve an award? It probably did for the moment. It probably, the moment is really nice. They happen to come against each other very, very nice. It's just that as a photographer, this told me that I need to try harder more than anything else. This image has told me that I need to try and do slightly harder. So when Sushil was, talking about, he wants to know how I started thinking about images and, what do I think? I think this image when I won, not in 2015 when I clicked it, but in 2017 when I won the award, that's when I started thinking much more consciously, on what do I want to portray and how can I add a Rahul Sachdev in here. If you see this image, there's no Rahul Sachdev. It's an image in the wild, clicked well. That's about it. So I want to add a little more mystery, a little more story, a little more of myself into the images, and that's what I do. I was going through an interview of a very, very inspirational photographer called Federico Veronesi. I think, by far, I am most influenced by that guy. And his images are predominantly black and white, predominantly dark, predominantly brooding kind of images. And he mentioned that, he did not want to show action. He did not want to show anything gory. He wanted to convey his emotions through the images, and that's where I connected with him. I think I want to convey my emotions through my photography, using nature where I can, right, and not doing injustice to nature as well. Anyways, moving on to song 4, and this is where I really started seeing things differently and started visualizing things differently. Okay, there are a few slides here. We could there are quite a few slides actually. We'll just run through them because I know we are not very, we are probably around 20-25 minutes from completion. Should be okay. I think should be enough. All right. So this is the time when I actually started, as I said, that I started doing things slightly differently, right? So if you see the image on the left, it's of a Indian skimmer clicked in Chambal with a nice green fields in the background, uh, probably at around sunrise or something of that sort, because that's what the angle of the sun is telling me right now, that knowing the place, that's how it probably was. Now this was back in 2012-13. A decent image, I don't doubt that. It's got a sharp enough, good angle, good catch light, everything nice. But there's, as I said, there's no me in it. And the next time when I went there, hello. Okay, I'll continue ignoring that. So let's assume that 2019 when I went back, 2019-20, when I went back to Chambal, I said, I need to do things slightly differently. And my go-to answer for everything different is probably first to start with against the light. And over the years of clicking birds, I have noticed that for most of the smallish birds, when they spread their wings, the sunlight can come through them, through the wings. I said, I mean, and the translucence of the wings shows a nice orange if you're clicking against light. So that is what I wanted to try with the skimmer. Yes, it is very tough to autofocus when you're doing against light photography, which is why the probability of success is very less. But sometimes it so happens that you get lucky, right? So I got lucky in one of the images, and the next time I went there, I came back with this image, heavily underexposed against light. The bill part of it, wherein the bill was translucent, was a surprise to me. I did not expect that. I'm very happy that that happened, because without that, I think it was a failed attempt. Imagine if the bill was not seen here in this image, right? Fail hota pura. So I got lucky with it, but thankfully I experimented to get lucky, kind of thing. So this is what I started to do more. Started to visualize in terms of what the place can do. I know that the Chambal River is very narrow and it's got steep banks on both the sides. So when the sun is coming at the right angle, I could get dark background against the banks for the bird, which is what is leading to the black background here. The technical aspect is very straightforward. I point at the sun, lock my metering at the sun, and wait for the bird to move, so that the camera does not meter against the wrong light. I want to meter against the sun so that it is the only the brightest things in the image show up, which is what is the basic idea of rimlet photography. I went from doing normal silhouettes to slightly abnormal silhouettes. Now, if any of you have been to Tal Sapar, you'll know that this is a no-brainer shot. Every evening you can get one or the other bird sitting on a stick there against light, and which is, this is probably a white-eyed buzzard sitting on the stick in the main area of the, where the black bucks are, somewhere around there. Now, this is what I started doing in the latter stages, in the last 2-3 years, kind of thing, if I may say so. Grasslands. I mean, Tal Sapar is one of the most beautiful grasslands that we today have in our country, at least in the western parts. And the silhouette on the left does not tell me anything about the place. It does not tell me, absolutely zero about the place. It just tells me there is a dead stick on which a bird is sitting. Period. End of story. Versus the one on the right, which tells a story. It almost brings the grasslands to life. And the advantage of going very orange with this image was it almost brought the grasslands on fire. If you may, if you can visualize it that way, at least that is the story I want to say, that we are lighting the entire nature on fire, and that's what this image represents to me. The birds are trying to fly away, save themselves from the fire of the on the grass, kind of thing. If you remember, I talked about the spot-breasted parrotbill earlier as well. The one on the left is a standard portrait kind of thing. The one on the right is what I want to do now. I want to use light more strongly. I want light to be a very, very strong component in my images. So earlier we used to say, use the light well to get nicely lit image. The two most important components in your image probably are the subject being clean and the background being clean and far, and getting nice bokeh. Now for me, it's 3 components: light, background, subject, and a lot of times in that order. Okay, that the importance has changed a little bit. The one on the right here is probably a more standard rimlet image that you get from Bharatpur with a darker background. It's not very difficult to get. The one on the left is where I have hidden most of the bird behind a bush. I mean, I did not place the bird there. The bird was already there. There was a nice bush in front of it, and underexposing and getting a rimlet with that bush, kind of mystifying the whole thing, sort of worked for me. I play around a lot with white balance. You'll see that in a lot of my images, and we'll come to that at the end of the of my webinar. I'll talk a little bit about white balance, and we'll discuss it at that point in time. Again, two rimlet images which are slightly different. I try to look for moments. I try to anticipate moments. I could not anticipate the ostrich thing, so I'll not I'll not claim that. But I could anticipate the darter shaking of water, because that's what it is. It is obviously going to do when it comes out of the water. It's very obvious it might try to shake, and that's what it did in this particular situation. So this is again at Bharatpur. I do a lot of my work in Bharatpur, and rather than going to the typical sunset points near Solar Pump or Sapanmori or whatever, and sitting and waiting for those painted storks or cormorants, I decided that today we're going to just sit at this pond, which is very, very conducive in terms of getting rimlet images of darter. And there are generally darters around there. And this guy, it did not take us much amount of time to get lucky with this guy. Probably half an hour, 45 minutes, and we got this image, and we were like, bas ho gaya, sham nikal lo ghar ja, kind of thing. It's an image that prints very well. I did a print for a client for this image, and we're pretty happy with that one. Okay. In addition to using light, in addition to trying to add a story to everything, I think one thing that I realized very late in my career was how important space was, which is why I seldom go out without a wide-angle lens nowadays. The one on the right is of a lioness sitting on a nice tree in Dutu in Tanzania. Clicked with a wide angle, obviously, because of the feel of it. And I think without that wide angle, without the tree, this image would have been nothing. So similar to the one on the left, which is the leopard climbing down and jumping onto the broken branch. Now that image is clicked with a 500 mm on a teleconverter. Okay, it's not a wide angle. The reason I put this image there is because this was a decision that I took, that there was an opportunity of going very close to this tree to take an image of this leopard, and there was an opportunity of staying far away and not giving into that urge. Oh, by default urge hota hai na, matlab it's like I don't know whatever your poison is in terms of food, but let's say for a Punjabi person, it's like rajma chole, rajma aa gaya to khani padega. So it's like animal dikha to paas jaane padega. That has been ingrained into us for some reason or the other. And over the past few years, I've consciously started to step further and farther and farther away to see if I can tell a bigger story. And that image, I think, gives me a bigger story in terms of the leopard climbing down from his home. Yeah. Again, the one on the left is quite a common thing to see, in the wild. Lions mating is not a very uncommon thing. Anybody who's been to Masai Mara would have seen it. So when I went to Tanzania and I saw this, I'm like, kya karna yaar, iska photo leke kya karunga. So I went slightly wider with this. This is probably with a 70 mm kind of frame, wherein I included the kopis, which are the rocks that you see in Serengeti, the tree, which is a very typical flat top acacia, and the grassland, along with the lions. I think that gives a complete story, which is what I'm trying to do these days. As I said, go back, give a complete story. Same goes with the image on the right. It's from a marsh in Dutu, wherein this lioness has hid her cubs. There are 8 cubs sitting in there in the bush, in the grass somewhere. We don't know where it is, where they are. And this lioness used to keep popping up her head every once in a while. And I thought, to really convey the message right, I need to include the entire thing, entire grassy patch as well, as much as I could. If I would have gone any wider, there were bare brown patches as well, which is why I stopped at this. Otherwise, I would have gone wider probably if there was more of the greens around. Okay, we all do slow shutter photography. We all love panning. I think it's one of the easiest ways to go creative. The next time you go out, I would suggest try doing the opposite. Go for slow shutter, but don't attempt to get anything sharp, almost nothing sharp. The one on the left is skimmers flying through the sky, clicked at a ridiculously slow shutter speed, which is why I'm getting everything shaky. But still, there is some amount of form defined there, which is why it makes an intriguing kind of frame. The image on the right is more, more satisfying technically to me. It's because it's a effect that I knew that I'm gonna get. So I had these flamingos foraging in the water, at very very low light, and I kept it at a shutter speed of around 1/5 of a second or something of that sort. And for most of the duration, I just kept the camera on the beanbag very steady. And just before the end of the duration, I moved the camera slightly. That moving the camera slightly created that blur of the flamingos that you see above them, kind of thing. It's almost as if they are, I call this image "Beam Me Up, Scotty" kind of thing. For those of you who know the old time Star Trek, you would know this statement. "Beam me up, Scotty" is what I call them, because they almost seem to be beaming up to some other world. I've always been a fan of silhouette. I still am a fan of silhouette, but I needed to do something different with silhouettes, right? So I started doing some experimentation with including more of the foreground, like I did with the Chinkaras on the left. By and large, most of us want to convey happy moments, happy things in life. Even through our photography, subconsciously, we want to, when I teach photography, the basics of photography, one of the first things that we talk about in composition is, if a subject is looking towards, let's say, towards the right, you give more space towards the right, because you want the subject to feel free, right? You want to give that freedom, sense of freedom. Now, who said that sense of freedom is the only sense that you can have? I mean, you could want to portray a sense of engagement or engaged as well, right? Which is what I wanted to do with this silhouette here. Not everything is hunky-dory and bright. There's a lot of darkness in life, and which is what these cheetahs are looking at, staring at in the night, because they don't know that there was a coalition of 4 male lions around them, and we didn't know how the day is going to end for these 4 cheetahs. So this was a mother and 3 cubs. Thankfully, we found them the next morning, so it wasn't as dark as I'm sounding it for them. But yeah, it was an interesting take for me. It was one of the first times that I thought about conveying darker emotions and not really pleasant feelings, kind of thing, consciously. The one on the left is something that I posted on Insta today. It's a very heart-wrenching moment for us, because these 2 were frantically searching for the other cub who had gone missing since morning. She couldn't find the cub, but it was a day that I'll never forget in my life, because of the incessant way these guys were going on, calling the young one, calling the cub that come back. God knows where it went. I mean, there were many theories on where he vanished on that particular day. But in the morning, there were 2 of them, and then by the end of it, it was just 1 of them. And I went rimlet because it connects better. I think it gives more stronger emotions here. Again, I did not go too low on the underexposure, because I did not want a complete black here. I think it was very important to portray the cheetah in order for you to connect with it, you as an audience. The image on the right, again, is a result of me trying some different things with silhouettes. This is a couple of lions sitting next to a water hole, watching the sun rise. And I think, rather than getting a typical silhouette, I thought, this might work better. Some moments in the wild are pure luck. So one on the left is very lucky moment for me, wherein I got a silhouette and a side lit kind of frame in one go. I would have loved to have a wider frame here. I'll be very honest. I think the tree is cut very abruptly at the top. I might have a frame of that as well, wider as well, but I don't think I had a silhouette at that point in time. So anyways, there are learnings for the next time if ever I happen to get luckier here. The one on the right gives me gives me a lesson that I need to always be aware of the surroundings. For most of my day in the morning, I was clicking with a 500mm lens here, and I was getting just the male lion kind of thing in rimlet. For a few minutes, I thought, let me give a bigger story, and let me get the lion and the lioness as well. I was not thinking about the topis and the gazelles in the background kind of thing. And suddenly what happened is one vehicle zoomed in, because they also wanted to get the lion and lioness together. So they zoomed in from behind the gazelles, and the dust that they raised suddenly brought these guys into a silhouette kind of thing. And that probably sealed the moment. I've never processed any other image from this sighting, which lasted for a good 45 minutes. I think this was the only image that I needed because it tells a much more completer story in terms of, how the African mornings are, with the prey waiting for the predator to make a move. This is a genre that I'm very, very bad at. I would probably call this more abstract than what I do. And there are a lot of great photographers around who are very good with the doing these kinds of abstract work. I'm trying to see patterns in the wild very consciously. I'm making a wholehearted attempt at doing this better, and hopefully, the next time you guys hear from me, I'll have some more images of abstract kind of thing to show you. It's more of a way of seeing, I think, and I'm trying to learn. I don't know whether I'll be able to learn, whether it's something that you can learn, but let's see. It's a process. Okay. One of the things that we talk about when you talk about basics of photography is about going vertical and using portrait in a vertical manner kind of thing. And now that I'm talking about light and creativity, I think vertical cannot be left aside. It is a very, very strong tool for composition and for telling a story. The image on the left is very simple, of two grebes in the morning in Bharatpur on a very, very misty morning, coming just in view enough for me to be able to lock focus on them and make this image. The image on the right is a more interesting image in terms of the moment for me, because it is almost as if the lion is going to any moment jump down onto me. And this moment reminded me of a scene in a movie called The Ghost in the Darkness. I don't know how many of you have seen this movie, but there was a particular scene where they show a lion in silhouette coming from the top of a railway station. So it was an old time 1800s railway station, those typical triangular structures. And he was on top of the triangle with a huge mane, and he roars from there, and when the camera moves onto him. It is a scene that I'll never forget in my life. It's been, I don't know, I think it was 1996 when this movie released, and somewhere around then when I saw it, it still is very, very crystal clear in my mind. And when I saw this in Tanzania, I was like, yeah, ye moment to capture karna hi. This composition goes against the rule of thirds in some sense. If you take a ruler and you make that matrix, the lion is not going to fall in the rule of thirds. He's going to be much above the rule of thirds. But I wanted to convey that dark, the enormity of the situation, the enormity of how the situation seemed very intimidating to me, because itna bada rock hai upar lion, and it could jump kind of thing, sort of thing. I also kept this lens flare. If you notice these dots, these are lens flares, because the sun was somewhere here and there was some stray light coming into my camera, and I kind of like it. It works for me, because it kind of tells me that this image was not very well controlled by me, which is what the situation was, because I was not very confident with the lions at that point in time. Again, a couple of natural history, one natural history moment, one car moment. Just like the earlier image wherein the car made the silhouette possible, even with the giraffe thing, a vehicle went ahead and raised this cloud of dust and it gave me the silhouette. The one on the left is from a particularly misty morning in Mara. I haven't seen very many misty mornings in Mara, and I was very, very eager to shoot anything that presents itself in the mist. And I got lucky with an impala and a couple of giraffes. Obviously, it was not as blue as you see here. I chose a cool white balance to drive home the point of the cold, misty feel kind of thing, right? Then you get some lucky moments in the wild wherein the light falls in a particular way that it seems to be more than what it is. Both the cases, it almost seems as if light is trying to communicate with the subject, both with the lion and the elephant on the right. I just got lucky. Lucky that I was there and smart enough to capture them. Nothing else. Now you'll see a stage wherein probably things will go more black and white, and I'll start depending less and less on color and more on more stronger geometrical forms or more stronger visual forms, when I used to start clicking, when I started clicking silhouettes, even in the earlier silhouettes, you would have seen that, they were very clean. There was a lion coming down the rocks. There was a lioness going up some hill kind of thing. Very clean silhouettes. Giraffe standing, very clean silhouette. Now with this cheetah, what it tells me is that cheetah kahan rehta hai? Cheetah stays in the grasslands. Cheetah is inherently dependent on grasslands. And I think if I try and delete all the grass from here now, this image will reduce in value by 50%. The grass is adding so much more here. Such a lot of story is being told by the grass about where the cheetah stays kind of thing, which is why I think it's very important for me to eliminate everything else. मुझे color भी नहीं दिखाना. I don't want to show clouds. I don't want to show anything else. I want to just convey grass, cheetah, silhouette. End of story. Okay. Same goes with the one on the right. It's of a lilac-breasted roller. Now, whenever we all go for rollers, we are all desperate to see rollers in breeding plumage क्योंकि colors अच्छे दिखते हैं. नहीं चाहिए color. I want to use just the form of the place kind of thing, right? So this is a lilac-breasted roller sitting on a rock, and that's it. As simple as it gets, as plain and simple as it gets. Okay. Yes, I think today my favorite component in the wild is dust. So you'll see a lot of images with dust. I consciously plan for outings wherein it is highly likely that I get dusty environments. Sometimes I get lucky, sometimes I get horribly unlucky, and it's all raining, and I don't get any dust. For example, last December, which is I thought that Mara will be okay and not too rainy. I did not see the sun probably for even a single day very well, apart from that cheetah day that silhouette happened. But anyways, so we did find our fair share of rain, but no dust on that occasion. Contrary to that, we had this outing to Amboseli in November, wherein there was nothing else but dust. Everything was in dust, and I was very happy. And one thing that I can tell you for dusty images is always shoot against light, because dust has the inherent capability of scattering light. And when it scatters light, it looks brilliant. So if you're clicking dust with the light, it's going to result in a pretty ordinary kind of image. The moment you go against light, your image is going to be on fire, literally and figuratively, right? Another couple of scenes of these guys. The reason I'm showing you, these 1, 2, 3, 4, another set, 5, some more images of elephants is because of late I've started concentrating on species as well in terms of moments, not in terms of 1,000 different species chahiye. But if I'm doing a species, I want to make sure that I do it well. So when people plan this Amboseli trip, they generally do it as a क्या बोलते हैं साइड किक. मतलब मूवी में जाते हैं, मूवी देखने, पॉपकॉर्न जो होता है ना, पॉपकॉर्न एम्बोसेली हो जाता है. तो आप यू गो टू मसाई मारा, ठीक है यार, वी गोइंग ऑल द वे टू मसाई मारा, लेट्स डू ए 1.5 day trip to Amboseli as well. I think that is the most wrong way of doing Amboseli. Next time you do Amboseli, spend at least 5 days there. I am telling you, you're going to come back with a portfolio that is going to be brilliant, believe me, guys. So anyways, a couple of more decent shots of elephants. The one on the left is the two of them fighting in dust. Very easy to shoot. Again, the golden rule for backlit photography is you point at the brightest subject or brightest thing in the sky, lock your metering, and then go ahead and shoot. The one on the right is a lucky break. This elephant was crossing the road, and I've clicked with the moving vehicle. Didn't even stop forget stopping the engine. We didn't even stop the vehicle. He was just moving away, and I got lucky with the positioning. Couple of examples of showing the space and the enormity of the world that we live in. The one on the left is a group of wildebeest, or a herd of wildebeest coming from the river. And the one on the right is an elephant, a big massive bull in its full size, being almost reduced to nothing in front of a small dust storm that we experienced in Amboseli. So not always is light and dust with you, right? So sometimes you have to do things differently. Now, you can't resort to silhouettes, you can't resort to things like that. So here are a few examples where you use grass, or you use your foreground to add some element of क्या बोलते हैं, etherealness to your image. So this bird on the left, called the secretary bird, typically is a very confident bird. He will allow you very close if you give it enough time. And I got very lucky with going very, very low with this angle and had a lot of grass in front of me, which adds to the out of focus kind of feel. Same goes with the lion and the cub playing with each other. There was I did not go down on the ground to click these guys. They were on a small mound, and there was another mound in between me and them, which was acting as the foreground blur kind of thing. Right. So another couple of images from Amboseli. The one on the right is pretty standard image for me now, dusty image of zebras. The one on the left is what I can talk about for a minute, and we are very, very close to the end, so don't worry. Okay. When I was planning this trip to Amboseli, one of my friends, Shauri Sulake, told me that I told him that I've never been lucky with the Kilimanjaro with elephants. Every time I go there, it is clouded, and I've never been lucky with it. So he said that, quite frankly, I'm not even looking forward to seeing images of Kilimanjaro and the elephants because they have been done to death. There is nothing that we can do much differently. So when I saw this opportunity of a side-lit elephant with the Kilimanjaro, I latched onto it because I think this is slightly different than the typical run-of-the-mill elephant walking against the Kilimanjaro kind of image that you get these, most of the time. I've seen some images like this. I'm sure people have better images as well, but this, for me, for my collection, I think this is the best that I've got for a side-lit elephant with the Kilimanjaro kind of thing. Again, I go back to dust. One of the toughest thing to capture in wildlife photography is action. When I say action, not all action is very difficult. Some action is easier than the others. The migration time when the animals are crossing the river, I find it particularly maddening and tough. The reason being, there is so much happening, and there is such a large number of them that composing is a nightmare. And I have never been satisfied with the results that I have got from migration time, of the crossings at least. Anyways, these two images work slightly with me because of the amount of dust there was, and the fact that I could compose to some meaning, especially the one on the right where I'm leading the wildebeest from a path of blurriness to a path of clarity in some sense. That's how I look at it. If somebody asks me, now you can have your own interpretation for each of them, kind of thing, right? Okay, so these two images are the one on the left is of a lioness sitting in the pouring rain. I see a lot of people rushing in and closing their cameras when the rain happens. I think with today's technology, most of your cameras are pretty weather sealed to endure a bit of rain. I'm not saying you keep it drenched for half an hour, but 5 or 10 minutes of thoda bahut gila is not a problem, I think. And the next time you see animals in rain, try to capture them because it really evokes, brings forth very different emotions. The one on the right is a particularly interesting image. I don't know how many of you see the lioness there, but there is a lioness sitting on one of the branches. I'll give you a second to see it. Right, on the top right here, you see a lioness lying down. So you were going under her, and I did not stop the vehicle. Okay, I did not have the guts. I still don't have the guts to stop the vehicle under a sleeping lioness. So she was very close to the roads, and in Dutu, if you go there, you'll see lionesses have this habit of going up the trees every afternoon. We believe it is predominantly to get rid of the mosquitoes, which are more in number on the ground. So they go up in the afternoon, lie there, and then they come back in the evening. And I got lucky with the positioning of this lioness. Clicked from a moving vehicle. I did not want to take a risk. I had a wide angle lens on my camera. I stuck it out of the camera of the vehicle and pre-focused kind of thing at f16, and hoping that everything will be in sharp enough focus. I just went cut as the vehicle went through. I got 3 or 4 frames wherein the lioness was visible and in decent position as well. Okay, now, these are 2 from Japan, from a place called Lake Kusharo. 2 examples of exposure as they can be used in Japan. The one on the left is overexposed and more commonly done in Japan. A lot of people do overexposure in Japan to enhance that mist and the white feel of everything. The one on the right is a lesser explored side of Japan. When you see Hokkaido, you do a Google Hokkaido swans or Google Hokkaido crane or anything that Hokkaido is known for during the winter season, you will see that most of the images are overexposed. You will rarely come up with any underexposed image of any of the subjects there. It's not as if there is no darkness, right? It's not a 24-hour daylight kind of scenario, which is why I decided to go underexposed with a few of my shots with the swans. And I think this one in particular worked well because it still has the misty background, still conveys that feeling, and also adds an element of kya bole? Again, mystery is the word that comes to my mind. Sorry, very bad with words, right? A couple of more black and white silhouettes where I went a little abstract in terms of the processing as well. I made the whites very white kind of thing and reduced, devoid of any color because these have been done very recently, and I think I'm affected by COVID in a way in terms of representing them, because there is a lot of stark black and white life going on these days for most of us, and that's what these two represent for me. The lion looks almost sad sitting alone on a rock face. I did not want to show anything else which would add any element of fun to his life kind of thing. And there is obviously the social distancing that you're seeing in the Koki's Hartebeest on the right kind of thing. Which brings me to the topic that I said that I will cover at the end of it, which is white balance. So all these four images that you see, top one of ostriches after sundown, the elephant just before sunrise, the cranes in a misty river in Japan, and the inverted silhouette of a lion in the water. They all could have been clicked at your typical daylight white balance, and you could have got an orangish or yellowish or flat kind of frame. But I consciously decided to go around 3,500, 4,000 blue tones with these guys. The reason why I choose to do this more these days than earlier is because, no, not the mystery. Because a lot of people tell me, even today, and rightly so, that you could change the white balance while processing. And if I'm clicking raw, I can't change the white balance while processing. Absolutely no two thoughts about it. Mera kya hota hai? Me personally, I probably wouldn't try any of these images with a 4,000, 3,000 kind of Kelvin if I did not think about it in the field. At home, imagine that you clicked this crane wala image, okay? Imagine this was clicked at 5,600 Kelvin. Now, very evidently, the blue in this image is not the key. The key in this image is this frost on the trees, the mist in the river, the dancing crane. अब ये मैंने white balance 5,600, 6,500 पे भी click किया होता तो भी image अच्छा लगता. It would have still been a good enough image for me to show to people, right? And I wouldn't have found the need to convert it to, convert the white balance to a cooler shade and see what happens. So that see what happens, I try to do on the field as much as I can, because I know I will not do it in the actual, post-processing kind of thing, which is why I wanted to have this slide wherein I talk, show more of the blueness kind of thing. Again, here are a couple of images wherein I've started using more of the foreground. This is probably, both of them are clicked in Feb, wherein both of them are situations where without the foreground, you remove the foreground, then ye images aap click hi nahi karoge. These are images that you will never click. The one on the right, if you notice very carefully, you will see that there is a stick coming out of the head of the eagle. This one has eagle with a very bad, dead branches kind of thing background. But adding an element of foreground, very out of focus foreground, and giving this window is adding a lot of value. So these are clicked through the bushes in Bharatpur. I've plonked the camera through the bushes to be able to try and get this image. The only difficulty here is trying to get focus, but you will get used to it once you start trying it, right? Again, a couple of examples of out of focus foreground, which I use to add more story to the image, if I may say so. There is more unknown kind of thing to the image. Which brings me to the last slide. This is a image that is very close to my heart. It is as most of you would have guessed, there are two lion cubs with the mother sleeping in the background. Typical rimlet, if I may say so, in terms of the execution. But I nonetheless like it because it gives me an art kind of feel, and it gives me a feel that somewhere in the world, the wildlife is still safe and feel safe enough to enjoy a sleep, enjoy a nice siesta while the cubs are awake, kind of thing. So that has been my journey so far. I took much more time than I should have, I know. So I thank all of you who have stayed around. And Sushil, I'm open for questions. If anybody has any, if anybody is not awake, I can offer coffee as well. I have my coffee here, so I can take some,
No, actually didn't realize how long it has been because the session was that great. I loved watching the images. I was actually thinking about each of the image and what went might have gone into your mind while you were creating these images.
Thanks so much.
We have few questions in the chat box. The first from Devanshu. It is, do you ever use rescue animals as subjects? As in, although I know this, that usually in India at least we don't prefer captive animals.
Yeah.
But the question that he has framed. Also, his second question to you is, how much research do you do on the animals before you go to photograph them for the first time? Do you know their...
Yeah, I'm seeing that. Do you know them intimately first, or do you just do it? Does it depend on the animals? Yeah. You gave me the easiest answer in the end. It does depend on the animals. But having said that, no, there's no rescue animal here. I have not worked with rescue animals yet. I'm not sure, if you ask me, are you open to work with rescue animals or not? I have not given it enough detailed thought, quite frankly. But not yet. Having said about, having thought about research, yes, I try to do as much research as I can. Okay. So for example, the skimmer images that you saw from Chambal, wherein, so it's not only about the place, it's also about how would the animal be in that place. Okay. So I knew that Chambal mein I can get against the light images of the skimmers. I knew that for example, elephants you get in Masai Mara as well, right? I mean, I don't have to go to Amboseli to see an elephant, unless I want that Kilimanjaro against the elephant. That is what people think. But to know when, so the elephant population is not constant, right? I mean, it's going to keep moving. They move in a corridor. So I need to know which months are good enough for the elephants. Over and above that, I need to know which months are good enough in terms of light, in terms of the atmosphere, in terms of the images that I want to create. Now, the song 4 of me, if you notice, is a lot about dust. So I want to go during the dusty times, right? Same goes with Japan. Hokkaido, I want to go at a time when the probability of getting the target species is the most. I want to make creative images of those target species, kind of thing, right? So yeah, I think one of the most important things that I do is researching about a place, both in terms of the subject and in terms of the light. That's what I'll say.
Right. There are a few more comments, but there are more compliments than questions actually. Kaustubh says wonderful presentation and opens up great avenue for creativity.
Thanks, Kaustubh.
Hemant says fantastic story. Rahul enjoyed it thoroughly.
Thanks, Hemant.
So I personally have a question for you. I have put up a story of yours about the Blakiston's fish out. So why did you pick to go all the way there and this one particular species? Why this one? And especially I saw the other pictures of people. I think some of them traveled with you. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I used external light sources to light up the subject, but yours are monochrome, right?
They are clicked from the same place. I'm just seeing whether. Let me do one thing. Is my screen still shared?
No, you'll have to share it again.
Okay, let me. I believe you're talking about a particular image.
Yeah, I will link for it if you want. I can just put it on the chat box.
Yeah, if you can do that, maybe you can.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay, where is it? Oh, Baba, the link, बहुत ही बड़ा link.
It's a Facebook link. So.
Okay, let me open it up. Okay, this one. Huh? Okay, let me share my screen so that people can see it. One second. अबे किधर गया यार? I am so bad at this. Okay, I found it. Okay, so I am sharing it. Hopefully you guys can see it. Can you see it?
No.
Can you see it now?
Yeah. Now you can. Yeah.
Okay. So this is an image of the Blakiston's fish owl on a snowy night. Okay. So the Blakiston fish owl is the largest owl in Japan, at least. Okay. and it is one of the most critically endangered owls. Having said that, I had no particular interest in this owl because I thought that photographically it had very less opportunity for me to do anything. So the way this owl is clicked is they have created a setup kind of thing wherein you go to a place in the evening, have dinner, and wait out for the entire night, wherein this owl comes in to a particular area in a stream. So what they've done is there's a stream coming down from the mountain, and they've blocked the part, or every afternoon probably they go and block the part of the stream for a few hours, which sort of creates a pool where there are fish. So this guy comes in and grabs a fish and goes, kind of thing. And if you do a Google again of Hokkaido Blackiston fish owl, 90% of the images are going to be that owl sitting on the snow with a fish in its hand, or flying off with a fish in its hand, or in its talons. And that is something that I was not very interested in. So I did go because it's one of the keystone species of Japan when you go to Japan. So you have to go and see it. But the reason I went monochrome and the reason I went slightly different is because I wanted a different image of the owl rather than it. I wanted to tell about its environment, and I got lucky with the snow here. Obviously, there are more technicalities to it in terms of going low shutter speed, so that so as I said, we have this setup kind of thing where they flash a light source at 1/80th of a second, if I remember correctly. So if your shutter speed is faster than that, you are going to capture just one strobe of light, which illuminates the owl correctly. So I went a very slow shutter speed kind of thing. So the light flashed 5-6 times in that particular duration. So if I zoom in here, now Facebook is going to screw it up, but anyways, you will see that there are dots here, 1, 2, 3, 4,
Right.
5, 6 dots here, and the dots are because of the strobe going off or the light going off 5 times
Okay.
during the duration.
Right.
Yeah, I hope I answered something.
Yeah. No, also, you did answer my question. Just a question associated with it. Was it an agenda to go for this species, or it?
No. So we went here to this port town called Rausu for 2 reasons. Primarily for the eagle, for the Steller sea eagle and the white-tailed sea eagle.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, for a lot of waterfowl that you get there. You get a lot of harlequin ducks, golden eye, smew,
Right.
greater scaup, all rare species for India. You get there. So those were the
Right.
2 that we went there for, and this happened to come in with the bargain. That's about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, people. We can take 1 or 2 more questions. Rahul, in the meanwhile, I have another question for you.
Yeah.
In India, when bird photographers go out to photograph,
Yeah.
are these clusters that they visit? Unlike the previous days where people used to go and explore and find new places, like you said, you went to Sattal when it wasn't known as a birding hub, right?
Correct.
Do you think now that there are these studios or there are these clusters or pockets where people go, is that limiting Indian bird photographers from exploring and finding new species or creating new images?
So without generalizing it, that is what drove me away from species-oriented photography, I guess. That it all became too easy. In some way, everything is too easy. I mean, I still till date do not have an image of a green magpie. I used to die for that species because
Right.
it's a fantastic species. I've seen it multiple times, but never in a good enough environment. You go to a hide and you get it within a day. On
Right.
black perch, green perch, whatever you want. So at least when I talk to people, whoever goes with me, whoever considers talking with me, I generally try to tell people to, you satisfy your need of getting sharp, good images of very, very pretty birds by going to these places, but you have to explore more. And you very rightly said that most Indian photography, unfortunately, is getting bottled up with just this. People are not exploring more. People are just getting to these 10, 50, and unfortunately, hides are increasing in number in various places now, because there is monetary benefit to locals from that. True. So it's a good thing. Maybe it's a good thing for places like Northeast where people kill birds more often than they kill in, let's say, Western Himalayas. That you're giving them a source of livelihood if they start building hides there. But from a photography, or purely from a photography perspective, I think it takes the fun out of it in terms of the skills, in terms of even the satisfaction.
Right. I
True.
don't think there are any more questions. Let me conclude with one more question for you. If you could,
Okay.
in brief, tell people about the gear that you carry when you go on these trips.
So now I am a Canon maestro, right?
Right.
So you can't
Nice.
expect me to talk much. But anyways, so I started off my journey with a Nikon N65 back in 2003.
Mhm.
Then I moved to Nikon D70S. Then I said Nikon is not good enough for me. I moved to Canon 30D, Canon 50D. Then for a brief period of time, I went again to Nikon because Canon was not good enough for me. And finally, I landed with the Canon 5D Mark II, after which I stuck to Canon mostly. Because by the time I switched the fourth time, I realized, ki, boss, the problem is with the person, not with the camera, right? So
Right.
you better start accepting that. And so yeah, nowadays I primarily carry, I am a very big fan of carrying as many cameras. The number of cameras that I carry are generally equal to the number of lenses that I carry. I do not change my gear in the field, change my lenses in the field. Not
Right.
because of the dust. I am very bad in taking care of those things, but primarily because मेरा personally ये होता है, if I have to switch the lens, I will not do it. I will
Yeah.
just not compose that. I will just ignore that composition from my mind. आता ही नहीं दिमाग में कि एक
Right.
lens side में पड़ा है, I should use that also. So I carry one crop body, one full frame, and one whatever is available kind of thing,
Right.
and a telephoto lens, a wide angle lens, and sometimes a prime, not always a prime. So mostly I'll be with a 100-400 and a wide angle lens, and sometimes even with the 500 or a 400, whatever prime there is. But by and large, 100-400 and a wide angle. These are two very important lenses for me.
Right. We have a last question for you.
Okay.
By Apu, who actually is on the admin panel right now for this the tech part of it.
Okay.
So Apu is actually a student of mine from MIT, and this is something that I have his question. I am framing it in my own words, where this I see with a lot of students when I teach at MIT.
Okay.
They just assume that they will click any picture that they want anyhow without composing it or putting thought into it, and they think they'll cover it up in post.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about it? Like, should this trend be encouraged where you just click whatever you get and you come back and then just work your magic in Photoshop? Or I see a lot of people do this. A lot of students.
It's a very big question. I think it all boils down to what is driving you to click. What is that inside you that is telling you to click an image? If you are just, for example, I started my website back in 2005 called tigerlandphotography.com. Today I barely have a tiger image to show to anybody. Okay, there are like 2-3 decent images that I have, primarily because the kind of example that you spoke about is mostly to do with places where you have little control to do anything, right? Now, not everywhere you're going to get control. Yes, I completely agree. So, for places like Ranthambore, you go there 20-30 times, you might come back with decent images a few times, right? I mean,
True.
As Aditya Singh used to tell me that, out of 10 tiger sightings, 3 might be worth clicking. 7 might be just worth viewing. You can't create, out of those 7, you can't create good images even in Photoshop, right? But so, mere hisab se, for me, what I've started doing when I research a place, when I research what I want to click, the most important thing for me is the probability. What is the probability of me getting a good image in a place? The more that probability depends on me, the better the place for me. For example, Bharatpur. It is all about my creativity. I don't care about the species in Bharatpur. You go there in winter, kuch na kuch to hona hi hai.
True.
Now, if you start going to Bharatpur saying कि यार pelican खींचना है, duck खींचना है, नहीं मिला तो वापस आ जाओगे without it. So I think it really depends on where you're coming from as a photographer. If you want to create stories, which is what you should, I think, then there are enough places. You don't really need to be going to only a set of places. You could do creative photography in a lot of places, and so to answer the question in one line, choose your place wisely. Choose your place where the probability of getting a subject to your liking is better.
Right. I think that
and
answers.
don't rely too much on Photoshop. Yes, yes, processing is important. For example, when I convert to black and white, there, I need to know the basics of processing, right? I am not going to shy
Right.
away from that.
Right.
But don't make it the क्या बोलते हैं? Don't make it the salt in your food. If your food is not good, it is not good, right?
Yeah, true. Oh, that was amazingly put across. Actually, heard it for the first time. But yeah, I think Apu, that answers your question. Thank you, Rahul, so much for this wonderful.
Thank you.
I also thank everybody who attended this session. In case you want to check out Rahul's work, Rahul, if you could mention your website so people.
Yeah, it's www.rahulsachdev.net. That's where my images are, most of them. But if you want to follow me regularly, you should go to Instagram, and my handle is Rahul S Photography. So follow Rahul S Photography, guys, and that's where I post almost every day these days. Sometimes more infrequently than others, but yeah, it will be great to see you guys there as well. And please feel free to ask me any questions out there.
Right.
Right.
For people who joined the session a little late, please don't worry. This video will be on our YouTube channel by midnight tonight. Our YouTube channel is Journeys Explore. If you want, I can just quickly drop down a link for you guys. And also, in case you are keen on similar talks, our previous talks are also uploaded on the same channel. So Rahul's talk will be there. So in case you missed on any points because you joined in late, you can always attend the session there. Thank you, Rahul, so much.
Thank you, Sushil. It was an honor being here. Thank you for calling me. Take care and stay safe, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.